We all love the way we have full control over the lighting in a studio, how we can determine the way the light hits the subject and balance it beautifully with the light hitting the background. The challenge here is, how do you maintain this type of control in an outdoor shoot? I'm going to use a shoot we made for an Emporio Armani perfume advert. To achieve this, you're going to need a couple of items. Of course, you're going to need lights. I would recommend battery-powered strobes. That's the easiest to use. Any battery-powered strobe will do. You can also achieve this with a speed light. If you need more power, you may need to combine more than one speed light to get more power. But you need to get yourself a trigger that can trigger the speed light off camera. Very essential, so you can have flexibility in placing your lights. Secondly, of course, you're going to need a camera. Any DSLR or a film camera or a mirrorless would take care of this. You're also going to need modifiers. You're going to need 2 soft boxes and you're going to need a barn door. No doubt you're going to need 2 light stands. It's good to have a sturdy one. You need a sandbag in case you don't have too many people helping you to keep the light from falling off. To achieve this balance between shooting with a strobe and daylight, ambient light, you need a deep understanding of exposure. If you're a beginner and you don't understand these things, you need to go and take serious lessons on exposure. Now, let us look at it this way. You need to isolate the exposure for ambient light from the exposure for strobe. So the first thing you need to do is to find out what will get the correct exposure for your ambient light, your background, the daylight. What will give you the correct exposure? Let us say your correct exposure will be at a shutter speed of 200, ISO 100, you're shooting at f8. Now, I would advise that you shoot 2 stops under exposure for your ambient light. So instead of shooting at f8, let us say, it doesn't have to be 2 stops, it could be 1 or 2 stops lower. Let us say you shoot at f11 instead. So if you shoot at f11, you're underexposing the ambient light, which means it's going to be a little darker than usual. When you now come to your strobe, you will then blast your strobe to get the right exposure for the strobe on your subject at that f11. So you're shooting at f11 power coming from your strobe, getting the correct exposure on your subject while you are underexposing the background by 1 or 2 stops. Now, this is the trick. Why do I underexpose the subject and the background? I'm doing that so that my strobe can overpower the ambient light. That way, I'm in full control of the direction of light and the quality of light, temperature, and everything on my main subject. Now, most times if you're outdoors, you're dealing with a very bright sky, so 1 or 2 stops under exposure is actually good to bring out details from the sky. But then you've cut down the power of ambient light on your subject. That way you are in full control. So if you look at this picture, you see how we have taken a picture that exposes the background slightly underexposed, but if you look at the subject is too dark. Now see what happens when we switch the strobe on. Now that is the effect. It is extremely important to understand this. Now you're going to need 3 lights. First light is your key light, which I consider the main light. Once I've got my key light well exposed, every other thing follows. Check the intensity of the sun. Put your key light to illuminate the major part of your subject. In this case, it's the face of my subjects and their torso. So I place my key light 45 degrees above and slightly to the side to get the best modeling for the lights. Then the second light that I'm using here is a fill-in light, which also is modified with a softbox. I like to place that very low, mostly on the floor. What does this light do? It softens the shadows, but again, it creates more even lighting for the subject, because the key light sort of falls off when it goes towards the legs. You want to light up the legs, especially if you're shooting full length. That field light brightens up that and also softens the shadows on the face and creates that little glow and that catch light in the eyes of your subject. The third light is a rim light. I like to use this light to cut the subject out of the background. I usually want to put a bandeau on it. The bandeau will help avoid lens flare. That way you can direct and narrow the light to where you want it to hit. However, there is something here that may get back at you, and it's very important for us to note. There is what is called the flash sync speed of your camera. Now, most DSLRs have a speed beyond which your flash will no longer show in your picture. Most times, this speed comes between the shutter speed of 150th of a second to 200th of a second. Now, once your flash is going off beyond this speed, any speed faster than that, you will no longer see the flash at all. Now, it's very crucial when you're working your exposure in this circumstance to make sure that the balance with your aperture and shutter speed will keep your shutter speed low. So you start playing around with your aperture more and the ISO. You can go beyond the flash sync speed if you're working with a kind of flash that has what we call high speed sync, or you're working with a neutral density filter which can keep your shutter speed down. This is another lesson. Please, drop me a note if you want me to make a lesson on this topic. But for this our tutorial, you are good making sure you don't go beyond the shutter speed that is beyond your flash sync speed. I know this may come across as quite technical, but trust me, if you can crack this, you will then start to master exposure at a higher level. And I say the only way you can do this is to practice. Go outdoors, go into your garden and start to experiment. The more you shoot, the more you internalize. Thanks for staying till the end. See you in the next video.